The March sun felt warm against my back as I stood on the front porch of 412 Maple Street for the last time. The sold sign swayed gently in the Florida breeze, a red banner across my past. 34 years in this house. 34 years of memories packed into boxes and loaded onto a moving truck that had already disappeared around the corner. My name is Evelyn Parker, and at 72, I was about to make the biggest leap of faith of my life. 6 months earlier, my son Mark had called with what seemed like the perfect solution to both our problems. I could still hear his voice, strained but hopeful, crackling through the phone line on that September evening. "Mom, Sarah lost her job. The company downsized, and she was part of the last round of cuts." His voice had carried the weight of a man trying to hold his family together. "We've been looking at bigger places, something with a yard for Tommy and Lisa, maybe even space for you to have your own area." I had gripped the phone tighter, my arthritis making my knuckles ache. "Space for me. We've been thinking, after your mini-stroke last year, and with the stairs getting harder for you, maybe it's time we take care of you for a change. We could all live together, be a real family." The words had wrapped around my heart like a warm blanket. After my husband Robert passed 5 years ago, the house had felt too big, too quiet. The idea of grandchildren's laughter filling empty rooms, of being needed again, had made my chest flutter with something I hadn't felt in years' purpose. "But the thing is," Mark had continued, his voice dropping, "we can't qualify for the mortgage we need. Not with Sarah unemployed and my credit still recovering from the business loan, but if you were willing to sell your place and contribute to the down payment." I hadn't hesitated. "How much do you need?" The numbers had been substantial. My house would sell for around $180,000, and they needed $120,000 in cash for their dream home, a 2-story colonial with a screened porch and enough bedrooms for everyone. We'd worked out the details carefully. I would own 60% of the new house. They would own 40% after a year. Once all the legal paperwork was sorted and their financial situation stabilized, I would transfer full ownership to them. "You'll be part of everything, Mom." Mark had promised. "We'll make it work." Standing there 6 months later, watching the realtor lock the door behind me, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. Everything I'd ever known was behind that locked door. The kitchen where I'd taught Mark to make pancakes, the living room where Robert and I had danced to old records on Saturday nights, the garden where I'd buried my wedding ring under the rosebush because looking at it had hurt too much after he died. All of it was gone now, converted into a cashier's check in my purse, $120,000 for a new beginning. The taxi arrived at 3:17 p.m. to take me to my new life. The house at 847 Oakwood Drive was beautiful, exactly as the photos had promised. White siding, black shutters, and a wraparound porch that spoke of family dinners and summer evenings. Mark's Honda was in the driveway next to Sarah's minivan, but no one came out to greet me. I paid the taxi driver and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, my 2 suitcases beside me like faithful dogs. This was it. This was home now. The front door opened, and Sarah appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. At 38, she was still pretty in that harried way of working mothers, though the stress lines around her eyes had deepened since I'd last seen her at Christmas. "Oh, you're here," she said, not unkindly but without enthusiasm. "Mark's not back from work yet. The movers put your things in the guest room." Guest room. The words stung more than they should have. I followed her inside, noting the boxes still stacked in corners, the pictures leaning against walls waiting to be hung. The house smelled like fresh paint and possibility, but also like strangers. None of the familiar scents of home, my lavender sachets, Robert's pipe tobacco that still lingered in his sweater, the lemon oil I used on the furniture. "It's lovely," I said, meaning it. Sarah nodded, already turning away. "The room's upstairs. Tommy, turn that down." she called to her 8-year-old son, who was sprawled in front of a television that dominated the living room. The guest room was small but adequate. A converted home office with beige carpet and one window covered by paper-thin blinds. My suitcases sat in the corner like accusations. The bed was made with sheets that smelled of generic detergent. Functional. Temporary. I unpacked slowly, hanging my dresses in a closet that still held office supplies on the top shelf. Through the thin walls, I could hear Sarah talking to someone on the phone, her voice low and tense. Words drifted through temporary arrangement and until we figure something out. My chest tightened, but I pushed the feeling away. It was natural to have adjustments. Moving was stressful for everyone. Mark arrived home at 6:30, his insurance company polo shirt wrinkled, and his face showing the strain of a man juggling too many responsibilities. At 45, my son had inherited his father's strong jaw, but also his tendency to carry the world's weight on his shoulders. Mom. He hugged me, and for a moment, I felt the warmth I'd been hoping for. How was the drive? How's the room? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, sweetheart. The house is beautiful. But over dinner, takeout Chinese eaten from paper containers because Sarah hadn't had time to cook, I noticed the careful way they arranged themselves. Mark and Sarah on one side of the kitchen table, Tommy and 5-year-old Lisa on the other, me at the end like an afterthought. The conversation flowed around me, but rarely included me. When I offered to help clean up, Sarah waved me away. It's easier if I just do it myself. You should rest. That night, lying on the stiff mattress, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around me, I heard them talking in their bedroom down the hall. The words were muffled, but the tone was clear stress, worry, discussion about things that didn't include me. I closed my eyes and tried to picture Robert's face, tried to remember his voice telling me everything would be fine. But for the first time since he died, I couldn't quite manage it. The first week passed in a careful dance of politeness and adjustment. I woke early, made my bed with military precision, and tried to find ways to be useful without being intrusive. I offered to cook breakfast, but Sarah preferred her routine. I suggested helping with laundry, but she had a system I might disrupt. I asked about grocery shopping, but she already had her regular store and preferred shopping alone. By the end of the week, I understood my place grateful, quiet, and small. The children were the bright spots. Tommy would sometimes linger after breakfast to tell me about school, and Lisa would climb onto my lap while I watched television, her small body warm and trusting. But even these moments were monitored. Sarah would appear in doorways, watching with protective eyes, ready to intervene if I overstepped some invisible boundary. "Kids, let Grandma rest," became her frequent refrain. Mark was a ghost, leaving early for work and returning late, always with apologies about client dinners and paperwork that needed attention. When he was home, he moved through the house like a man walking on eggshells, afraid to disturb the careful balance Sarah maintained. The rules revealed themselves gradually. I could use the downstairs bathroom, but the upstairs one was for family. I could watch television after 8 p.m. when the children were in bed. But the remote stayed with Sarah. I could make tea, but the good mugs were for special occasions. Most telling was dinner. Every night. Sarah set 4 plates, 4 sets of silverware, 4 glasses. When I pointed this out gently, she flushed and added a 5th setting. But the message was clear I was not automatically included. By the 2nd month, the careful politeness had worn thin. The first real conflict came on a Tuesday afternoon when I took Lisa to the small park 2 blocks away. It was a beautiful day, and the little girl had been restless, asking repeatedly to go outside. Sarah was on the phone with unemployment services, stressed and snappy, so I quietly suggested a walk. Lisa was delighted. We fed ducks at the pond, played on the swings, and I bought her ice cream from a vendor. For an hour, I felt like a grandmother again, instead of an unwelcome houseguest. When we returned, Sarah was waiting on the front porch, her face tight with anger. "Where were you?" she demanded before we'd even reached the door. "At the park. Mommy!" Lisa chirped, still holding my hand. "Grandma bought me ice cream. You took her without asking me." The accusation hit me like a slap. She wanted to go out, and you were busy." "I was busy because I'm trying to find a job to support this family." Sarah snapped. "You can't just take my children wherever you want. You're not their mother." Lisa's small hand tightened in mine, confusion clouding her bright eyes. I felt heat rise in my cheeks but forced my voice to stay calm. "Of course not. I just thought, that's the problem. You thought, this isn't your house to make decisions in." Mark chose that moment to come up the driveway, briefcase in hand, tie loosened. He took in the scene, Sarah's flushed face, my carefully controlled expression, Lisa's confusion, and immediately sided with his wife. "Mom, you need to ask before taking the kids anywhere. Sarah worries. I was only 2 blocks away." "That's not the point." His voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "You need to understand boundaries." That night, I heard them talking again. This time, the words were clearer, unsustainable. Interfering. And worst of all, how long is this supposed to last? I began to notice other things. The way Sarah would casually mention assisted living communities in nearby towns. How Mark had started researching senior services online. The brochures that appeared and disappeared from the kitchen counter. They weren't planning for me to stay. The revelation came by accident on a Thursday morning in the 3rd month. I was dusting the living room, one of the few tasks Sarah allowed me when Mark's phone rang. He was in the shower, and Sarah was outside with the children, so I answered it. "Parker residence," I said politely. "This is Janet from First Federal Bank. I'm calling to confirm some information about the home equity loan application for Mark Parker." My blood went cold. "I'm sorry, what loan application?" "The $85,000 equity line of credit. We just need to verify some details about the cosigner, Evelyn Parker." I set the duster down carefully. "This is Evelyn Parker." "Oh, perfect. We just need to confirm your Social Security number and verify that you understand the terms of the loan secured against your property at 847 Oakwood Drive." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "I haven't applied for any loan." A pause. "Ma'am, we have your signature on the application, dated 2 weeks ago. You're listed as the primary borrower, with Mark Parker as the co-applicant." "I never signed anything." The woman's voice became cautious. "I think you should come in and speak with our loan officer as soon as possible." When Mark came downstairs 20 minutes later, hair still damp from his shower, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and shaking hands. "Who was on the phone?" he asked, pouring himself juice. "The bank? About a loan application I apparently signed?" He froze, orange juice carton halfway to his lips. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Mom, I can explain." "Can you? Because I'd like to understand how my name got on loan documents I've never seen." He sat down heavily across from me. In the morning light, he looked older than his 45 years, worry lines etched deep around his eyes. "We needed some cash for improvements to the house. New roof, updating the electrical, things that benefit all of us." "By forging my signature." "It wasn't forgery. You live here. It's your house too. I just streamlined the paperwork." The casualness of his admission was almost worse than the act itself. "Mark, what you did is fraud." "Don't be dramatic. Mom, it's a family thing. We're all in this together." But as I looked at my son, my baby boy, who I'd rocked to sleep, taught to ride a bike, cheered at every baseball game, I realized we weren't in anything together. I was alone in this house, and I was in danger. That afternoon, I drove to an electronics store and bought something I'd never thought I'd need: a small, voice-activated digital recorder. The recorder was smaller than a matchbox and could capture hours of conversation. I felt guilty and paranoid carrying it, but Mark's casual admission about streamlining paperwork had shattered my trust completely. I didn't have to wait long to use it. 2 days later, I was folding laundry in the living room when Mark came home early from work, agitated and talking rapidly on his phone. He paced the kitchen, unaware that I was in the next room. "No, use her name again," he said sharply. "She doesn't check her credit. She barely knows how to use email. Just use the same signature. It worked last time." I pressed the record button and held my breath. "Look, she's not going to be around forever. The doctor said people her age, especially after a stroke, can develop memory issues. We just need to hold on a little longer." A pause. Sarah's worried about the timeline too. But what choice do we have? We're drowning here. The credit cards are maxed, the car payment's behind, and now we've got her to feed and house too. Another pause. Longer this time. "No. She doesn't suspect anything. She's too trusting. Too old to understand how things work now." I stopped breathing entirely. "Trust me, once we get through this rough patch, everything will smooth out. And when she's gone, well, the house will finally feel like ours." He hung up and walked out, never knowing I'd heard every word. That night, I played the recording back 3 times, each word hitting me like a physical blow. The child I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything to help, was planning to use me until I died and celebrating the day it would happen. Over the next month, I became a different person. Gone was the trusting mother who believed in the goodness of her family. In her place was a woman with sharp ears and careful eyes, collecting evidence like a detective. I bought a second recorder in case the first failed. I started keeping a detailed log of conversations, documents I was asked to sign, and the gradual restrictions being placed on my life. I noted how Sarah would casually mention my confusion to neighbors, how Mark would reference my failing memory during phone calls he thought I couldn't hear. The most damning evidence came during a dinner conversation in my 4th month there. I had the recorder in my cardigan pocket as we ate Sarah's reheated casserole. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, cutting her food into precise squares, "about Mom's long-term situation." Mark glanced at me, then back at his wife. "What about it?" "Well, she's been here 4 months now, and I think we all need to be realistic about what's sustainable." I kept eating, keeping my expression neutral. "The kids don't have their own space anymore." Sarah continued. "Tommy's been acting out at school, and I think it's because he feels displaced in his own home." "Sarah," Mark said quietly, with a meaningful look toward me. "No, it's okay. We're all adults here." Sarah turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Evelyn, you must feel it too. The tension, the crowding. It's not fair to any of us." I set down my fork carefully. "Are you asking me to leave?" "Not asking," Mark said quickly. "Just exploring options that might be better for everyone." "Better how?" Sarah leaned forward earnestly. "There are some wonderful senior communities nearby, places where you'd have friends your own age, activities designed for your interests, medical care right on site. And you wouldn't have to worry about stairs or keeping up with household tasks," Mark added. I looked around the table, at my son who couldn't meet my eyes, at my daughter-in-law who was trying to sell me on exile, at my grandchildren who were focused on their plates with the intensity of children sensing adult conflict. "What about the house?" I asked quietly. "What about it?" Sarah replied. "My name is on the deed. I own 60% of this property." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "We'd work something out. Legally, financially, for Selma, you wouldn't lose anything." But I would lose everything. And we all knew it. That night, I added their conversation to my growing collection of evidence. I was building a case against my own family, documenting their plan to ease me out of the life I'd paid for. By the 6th month, I had enough evidence to fill a small filing cabinet. Recordings of phone calls, photographs of documents I was asked to sign, notes about conversations where my mental competency was questioned. More importantly, I had discovered something that changed everything. While organizing my important papers, I pulled out the manila folder Robert had labeled House Docs, Do Not Throw Out. Inside were the original purchase documents for 847 Oakwood Drive. And there, in black and white, was the truth I was still the sole owner of record. The plan to transfer 60% ownership to me, then later to transfer full ownership to Mark and Sarah, had never been completed. All those legal meetings Mark kept postponing, all the paperwork delays he blamed on the bank, none of it had happened. I owned the house outright. Mark and Sarah were living in my home, planning my exile, using my credit, and forging my name. And they had no legal claim to any of it. I sat on my bedroom floor with the documents spread around me, feeling something I hadn't felt in months' power. That evening, I made a phone call to Tom Hargrove, Robert's old attorney. We hadn't spoken since the estate was settled, but his voice was warm and familiar. "Evelyn? Good Lord, it's been too long. How are you managing? I need help, Tom. Legal help." I explained everything slowly, carefully. The move, the promises, the forged documents, the loan in my name, and what I discovered about the property ownership. Tom was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "Evelyn, what they've done. This is serious. Identity theft, fraud, potentially elder abuse. I know. What do you want to do about it?" I looked around the small guest room that had become my prison, listening to the sounds of the family who wanted me gone, discussing my future in the next room. "I want my life back. I'll be there Friday with a notary. We'll review everything and discuss your options." "Thank you. Tom, Evelyn, I've heard stories like this before, but you might be the first one who's doing something about it." That night, I slept better than I had in months. The confrontation came on a Saturday evening in late September, almost exactly a year after Mark's first phone call. Sarah had made her famous lasagna frozen from Costco, and we were gathered around the dining room table in what had become our weekly ritual of tense family dinners. Mark cleared his throat in the way that meant he had something important to say. "Mom, Sarah and I have been talking, and we think it's time to have a serious conversation about your future." I set down my fork and gave him my full attention. "I'm listening." Sarah jumped in, her voice artificially bright. "We've been looking at some really wonderful senior living communities, places that specialize in, well, in people who need a little extra support." "Support with what?" Mark and Sarah exchanged a look. "Well, your memory hasn't been what it was," Mark said gently. "You've seemed confused lately, repeating yourself, forgetting conversations we've had." This was news to me. "What conversations?" "See, like that. We've talked about this several times," Sarah said with exaggerated patience. "About how living here has become difficult for you. The stairs, the noise from the children, the general chaos of family life." I felt the familiar weight of the recorder in my pocket and was grateful I'd thought to turn it on before dinner. "I haven't had any trouble with the stairs," I said calmly. "But you mentioned your knees bothering you," Mark insisted. "My knees have bothered me for years. That's different from being unable to manage stairs." Sarah leaned forward with the earnest expression of someone delivering unwelcome but necessary news. "Evelyn, we're worried about you. Living alone in your own place, having the freedom to come and go as you please, being around people your own age. Don't you think that sounds nice? Are you asking me to leave? We're suggesting that maybe it's time to explore options that would be better for everyone." Mark said carefully. Better for you, you mean? Better for all of us, Sarah said firmly. You'd be happier. We'd have our space back, and the children could have a normal family environment again. I nodded slowly, as if considering their proposal. And what would happen to my investment in this house? Your investment? Mark looked confused. The $120,000 I contributed to the down payment, the money from selling my home of 34 years.
Well, obviously we'd work something out, Sarah said quickly. We wouldn't just... you'd be compensated fairly. For the house I own. Another look passed between them. Mom, let's be realistic, Mark said. Your name might be on some paperwork, but this is our family home. We've been making the mortgage payments, handling the maintenance, dealing with all the responsibilities of ownership. With money borrowed in my name without my permission, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What are you talking about? Sarah asked. But her voice had lost its artificial warmth. I reached into my pocket and placed the recorder on the table, its red light blinking steadily. Both Mark and Sarah stared at it as if it were a bomb. I'm talking about the $85,000 home equity loan you took out using forged documents with my signature. Mark's face went through several shades of red before settling on pale. Mom, what is that insurance? I said calmly. Something I learned I needed after living here for 6 months. Sarah reached for the recorder, but I moved it out of her reach. You've been recording us. I've been protecting myself, which, as it turns out, was necessary. Mark leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. Mom, you don't understand how complicated our financial situation is. We needed that money for legitimate improvements. You needed that money because you're living beyond your means and you saw me as an easy target. That's not fair, Sarah snapped. We've sacrificed to have you here. Do you have any idea how much stress this has put on our marriage, our children? What stress? The stress of having someone contribute over $100,000 to your down payment. The stress of having built-in childcare and housekeeping. The stress of having someone to blame for your financial problems. Mark stood up abruptly. This is getting out of hand, Mom. We've tried to make this work, but clearly... Sit down, Mark. Something in my tone made him comply. I had found my voice, and it carried the authority of a woman who had raised him from a baby and was not impressed by his tantrum. Let me tell you what's going to happen, I continued. First, you're going to contact the bank on Monday and confess to the loan fraud. Second, you're going to begin repaying that money immediately. Third, you're going to start treating me with the respect due to the legal owner of this house. Owner, Sarah laughed bitterly. You might have contributed to the down payment, but I own this house, I said quietly. 100%. The transfer of ownership was never completed. I never signed the papers to give you 60%, let alone the full ownership we discussed. This house belongs to me, and you are guests in my home. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, Tommy's video game beeping upstairs. That's impossible, Mark finally whispered. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared and spread the documents across the table. Deed of ownership, purchase agreement, mortgage documents, all in my name. I had my attorney verify everything this week. Sarah's face had gone white. You can't just... We have children. This is their home. This is my home, I corrected. And you've made it very clear that I'm not welcome in it. Mark stared at the papers as if they might change if he looked long enough. Mom, please, we can work this out. We're family. Family. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 72 years, but also feeling stronger than I had in months. Family doesn't commit fraud. Family doesn't plot to have me declared incompetent. Family doesn't wish for my death so they can have my house. We never... Sarah started. I have recordings. Sarah, hours of them.
including conversations about my inevitable demise and how much easier your lives will be when I'm gone. Tommy appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. What's happening? Why is everyone angry? I walked over and knelt down to his level. Grandma is going to move to her own place, sweetheart, but you can come visit me anytime you want. Don't you live here? Not anymore, baby. But I'll still be your grandma, and I'll still love you very much. I kissed his forehead and stood up, facing my son and daughter-in-law who were staring at me as if I'd transformed into someone they didn't recognize. I'll be out by the end of the week, I said. I suggest you start figuring out how you're going to afford the mortgage payments without fraudulent loans. I didn't wait for their response. By Monday morning, I was sitting in Tom Hargrove's office with a box of evidence and a clear plan. The fraud case is straightforward, Fee, Tom explained, reviewing the forged documents. The bank will freeze the account, demand immediate repayment, and likely press charges unless Mark cooperates fully. I don't want him to go to jail, I said. I want him to learn. Tom nodded. We can work with the prosecutor on that, assuming he makes full restitution and completes a financial responsibility course. And the house. It's yours, free and clear. You can sell it, rent it to them, or evict them, legally. They're tenants at will, with no lease agreement. I had spent the weekend thinking about this moment, about what justice looked like for a 72-year-old woman who had lost her home, her family, and nearly her dignity. I want them to buy me out, I decided. Fair market value for my portion, minus what they owe on the fraudulent loan. If they can't get financing, they'll need to sell and find somewhere they can afford. That's fair, Tom agreed. More than fair, considering what they put you through. By Tuesday, the bank had frozen the home equity account and demanded a meeting with Mark. By Wednesday, Sarah was calling me in tears, begging for mercy I no longer felt obligated to provide. By Thursday, I had signed a lease on a one-bedroom apartment in a senior living community with a view of the river and my name on the mailbox. Golden years. Community was nothing like the sterile nursing home Sarah had implied I needed. It was a vibrant complex of independent living apartments for active seniors, complete with a fitness center, library, and shuttle service to shopping centers. My apartment had a full kitchen, a balcony with a garden view, and walls that had never heard me called a burden. Moving day was quiet and efficient. I hired professional movers and took only what was mine, my clothes, my photographs, my books, and the few pieces of furniture that held real memories. I left behind the guest room furniture, the generic bedding, and 6 months of careful politeness. Mark stood in the driveway as I loaded the last box into my car, his face a mixture of guilt and desperation. Mom, please, can't we talk about this? We've done enough talking. Mark, it's time for action. I know I made mistakes, but you're still my mother. You can't just walk away from your family. I paused at my car door and looked at him, really looked at him. He was still my son, still the boy I'd rocked to sleep and cheered at Little League games. But he was also a man who had betrayed my trust in the cruelest possible way. I'm not walking away from my family, I said quietly. I'm walking away from people who saw me as an opportunity instead of a person. What about Tommy and Lisa? They love you, and I love them. Which is why I'm going to show them what self-respect looks like. Maybe someday you'll understand that's the greatest gift I can give them. Meet that. I drove away without looking back, and for the first time in months, I felt free. My new life bloomed slowly but surely. I joined the book club, took up watercolor painting. My roses still looked like cabbages, but they made me laugh, and discovered I had a talent for bridge. I made friends with my neighbor Hannah, a widowed teacher who had also escaped a difficult family situation. The legal proceedings were resolved within 3 months. Mark and Sarah managed to secure a new mortgage for 60% of the house's value, bought out my ownership, and used the remaining equity to repay the fraudulent loan. They downsized to a smaller home in a different neighborhood, and Mark began working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sad that it had come to this, but also grateful that I had found the strength to stand up for myself. The first contact came 6 months later. A birthday card with Tommy's careful handwriting. "Happy birthday, Grandma. I miss you. Love, Tommy." Inside was a drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. A week later, Mark called. "Mom, it's Mark. I was wondering if we could talk. Maybe meet for coffee." I considered his request for a long moment. Anywhere you want, your choice. We met at a cafe near my apartment complex, neutral territory where I felt safe, and he looked appropriately uncomfortable. 6 months had changed him. He'd lost weight, gained more gray hair, and carried himself like a man who had learned hard lessons. "I've been going to counseling," he said without preamble. "Financial counseling, and other kinds. Sarah and I both have." "Good. I need you to know that I understand what I did. Not just the fraud, though that was inexcusable, but the way we treated you, the way I treated you." His voice broke slightly. "You gave us everything, and we treated you like an inconvenience." I sipped my tea and waited. "I keep thinking about when I was 8 and broke your favorite vase playing baseball in the house. You made me work extra chores to pay for a replacement. Remember? You said actions have consequences, and that's how we learn to be better people." "I remember. I'm 45 years old, and I finally understand what you were trying to teach me." I studied his face, looking for the sincerity I wanted to believe was there. "What do you want from me, Mark?" "Nothing," he said quickly. "I don't want anything. I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. And I want to know if there's any chance you might forgive me someday. Forgiveness isn't something you earn in one conversation," I said carefully. "It's something you demonstrate over time." He nodded. "I understand. But would you consider letting the kids visit? They miss you. And I think they need to see that grandparents are supposed to be respected, not discarded." I looked out the cafe window at the life I'd built for myself. Independent, dignified, chosen rather than assigned. Then I looked back at my son, who was finally asking for the right things in the right way. "We can start slowly," I said. 1 year later, I sat on my apartment balcony watching the sunset paint the river in shades of gold and pink. Tommy and Lisa were in my living room, working on a puzzle we'd bought that afternoon during our monthly outing. These visits had become the highlight of my month, carefully planned, mutually respected, and treasured by all of us. Mark had proven his sincerity through consistent action. He'd completed financial counseling, paid off his credit card debt, and found steady work with a financial planning firm, a career change that seemed fitting given his hard-learned lessons about money and consequences. Sarah and Mark had worked through their crisis together, attending marriage counseling and rebuilding their relationship on more honest foundations. Sarah had found work as a school administrator, and they'd learned to live within their means in their smaller home. More importantly, they'd learned to respect boundaries, mine and each other's. Our relationship was different now. I was no longer the self-sacrificing mother who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. I was a woman with her own life, her own interests, and her own boundaries. Mark was no longer the desperate son looking for someone to solve his problems. He was a man taking responsibility for his choices and their consequences. The children adapted to the new arrangement with the resilience that kids possess. They understood that Grandma lived in her own special place, and visiting her was a privilege that came with rules, no tantrums, respect for her things, and gratitude for her time. In return, I gave them my full attention during our visits, something I'd rarely been able to do when I lived in their chaotic household. "Grandma," Lisa said, appearing on the balcony with a piece of puzzle in her small hand. "This piece doesn't fit anywhere." I looked at the curved piece of blue sky she held. Sometimes the pieces that don't seem to fit are the most important ones. You just have to find the right place for them. She considered this seriously, then ran back inside to try again. I smiled, thinking about how perfectly that metaphor fit my own life. For months, I had felt like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong place, creating jagged edges and distorting the whole picture. Now, in my own space, with my own purpose, I fit perfectly. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "Book club tonight. Margaret's making her famous brownies." I typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." This was my life now, chosen, not assigned. Full of people who valued my presence rather than tolerated it. Rich with activities that interested me rather than obligations that drained me. I had learned something profound in my 73rd year dignity is not something others give you. It's something you claim for yourself and protect fiercely. Love without respect is not love at all. It's dependency dressed up in pretty words. The fraud charges against Mark had been dropped in exchange for full restitution and community service at a senior center, where he now volunteered every Saturday helping elderly residents with their finances. I thought Robert would have appreciated the poetic justice of that arrangement. "The puzzle is done," Tommy called from inside. "Come see." I stood up, my knees protesting slightly, but my spirit light. The puzzle would be followed by dinner, takeout from the Thai restaurant downstairs, eaten at my small table with my good dishes. Then stories before Mark picked them up, and an evening of my own choosing afterward. As I walked inside to admire their completed puzzle, I caught my reflection in the sliding glass door. The woman looking back at me was older. Yes, but she stood straighter. Her eyes were clearer, her smile more genuine. She looked like someone who had stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. "It's beautiful," I told the children, and meant it. The puzzle showed a garden in full bloom, every piece in its proper place, creating something whole and lovely, just like my life. That night, after Mark had collected the children and thanked me for a wonderful afternoon, I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of chamomile tea and thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the devastation of betrayal to the triumph of self-advocacy, from the loneliness of exclusion to the richness of chosen community. I had lost a house but gained a home. I had lost the illusion of unconditional family love but gained the reality of earned respect. I had lost the role of self-sacrificing mother but gained the identity of empowered woman. The young social worker at Golden Years had asked me during my intake interview if I had any regrets about my decision to leave my family home. At the time, I'd said no, without hesitation. Now, a year later, I could say it with even greater certainty. I regretted the pain it had caused my grandchildren. I regretted that it had taken so long for me to find my voice. I regretted the years I'd spent believing that being needed was the same as being valued. But I didn't regret leaving. I didn't regret standing up for myself. I didn't regret showing two young children that their grandmother was someone who demanded respect, not someone who begged for crumbs of affection. Because here's what I've learned when you stop asking permission to matter, when you stop accepting less than you deserve, when you stop making yourself small to make others comfortable, that's when your real life begins. Age doesn't make you invisible unless you let it. Being a mother doesn't mean being a martyr unless you choose it. Being family doesn't excuse being cruel unless you allow it. I am 73 years old. I own my own home, make my own decisions, and surround myself with people who celebrate my presence rather than tolerate it. I have learned to say no without guilt, and yes without reservation. I have discovered that the best years of your life might be the ones you thought were behind you, and if that's not dignity, I don't know what is. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere across town, my grandchildren were probably getting ready for bed. Maybe thinking about the wonderful afternoon they'd spent with a grandmother who had taught them that love and respect go hand in hand. I raised my teacup in a small toast to the woman I had become, the woman who had been there all along, just waiting for permission to emerge, permission I had finally given myself